Okay, I'm back as the right person. Sorry. My Teams is acting up. So good morning, everyone. I see that your PowerPoint is up. Thank you. I see that folks are still joining the room. Michael, would you like me to give a couple more minutes?
No, I think probably at this point, we got a little over 50 people in, so I think we can just get started.
Okay. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome. This SORA event is really an opportunity for us to talk about something that we're learning is pretty near and dear across Oregon, and that is community resilience in the face of disaster. A part of what we do here at SORA, and that is the State of Oregon Research Academy, is we try and align the work that we do as workers of the state of Oregon with trying to align our events with things that are salient and relevant to Oregonians, those that we serve. And I sit on the executive committee, and when I was reading and looking through reports for workforce development, that's what I oversee, coordinate workforce development, I saw that the Secretary of State created a report last year, and in that report was discussing the gap in the workforce for those who work in research analysis, data and technology, and who we have working. And when I went deeper into that report around those aspects, I stumbled across a subsequent report that was talking about Oregon was a part of a national report where it talked about from 2010 to 2019. So this would be pre-pandemic, COVID pandemic. Oregon had already had 12 natural disasters across the state of Oregon, and that's a lot. It's actually quite a lot. And so we were thinking about how could we have an event where we could showcase some of the amazing things we do with the state, in particular around open data, that would be in alignment with that. And so I put together a proposal, ran it to the entire exec committee, and that is how the MAP Hackathon was born. And so a part of what we are actually looking for is how do we build that bridge with community? Oregon is one of the few states across the country that is well known for its robust disaster planning. And I went and looked on the website. There are lots of tools and resources. Everyone at today's event will be given information, links to that. And part of those resources that are looked at and discussed, when you're looking at it from the community lens, can be a little bit overwhelming on the one hand. And on the other hand, there are many recommendations that are made for which some of our communities across the state of Oregon, and it could be location, maybe rural, it could be, even if it's not rural, it could be urban, but proximity to some of the resources that are necessary to put together kits or to do some of the things that the disaster planning is recommending. And sometimes there might be community connections or community processes in place that we are unaware of at the state level. And so the purpose of this MAP Hackathon is to see where is that gap between what we are planning for and where the community is at so that we can better support them. There are a couple of documents that hopefully when they get to Michael, we'll drop them in the chat today, just for true transparency between the heat disrupting electricity and internet. I've had to do a few workarounds, so I'm hoping that Michael will get those documents. But there are two things that folks will be getting, and today we won't be showing how to navigate these documents because it will be the subsequent presentation that will come, that Dagan will be giving, that will be showing how one would take this data and put it into an Excel spreadsheet. SORA also has on its website kind of a walkthrough on using Excel spreadsheets, but you'll be getting a GIS platform matrix that we'll be using. But I felt that it was also going to be relevant for folks attending today, because the hope is that those of us at the state level participating are all on the same page. When we're working with community, the goal is that we can hopefully make this a little bit easier. And so on the GIS platforms matrix, it's essentially a document that I've used in a hackathon that I was leading a few years ago on the Democracy Lab platform, called the Butterfly Project. And it basically allows you to see the system, the GIS platform, to see its functionality as you go through it. Is it desktop? How you can access it. And so it pretty much has all of those. If there are newer ones, we can add to this sheet, but it's basically just kind of a matrix, because we never know what communities are using or how even each agency is addressing how they gather GIS data. But since we're mapping, we wanted to make sure that we have a repository so that everyone can understand what everyone's using, how they're using it, how it functions, and why it might or might not be the best tool for their particular team. And then we have another Excel document, and in that document, we will be that's one where, again, we won't be going through it today, but it's something that folks can look at and we can talk more about or ask questions about when we have our next one, where we're focusing on publicly available data. But it is the color of corona, and this is actually generated by the CDC. And it's a data file, and it's through August 18th, 2020. And it's the APM Research Lab. And they basically show us the industry, kind of a few details about the industry, the number of workers, what industry they're in, and they kind of disaggregate the data by gender and other information. And the beauty of this document is when we talk about open data with community, and this is just an example, it's often how we use the data, gather, clean it. It might be different, again, across communities. So this is one example that we will be providing so that people can see what some of that open data is. I chose the color of coronavirus, and Oscar will be talking a little bit more about this because of what's relevant to the communities that we might be serving. Information will align with what we're looking at, as well as how do we take open data, in particular around vulnerable populations, and transfer it into a map so that we can visualize it. And I'm going to close with, before I head into Oscar, I just want to not Oscar, sorry, Hector's speech. I just want to introduce and talk about, give a little bit of props to Hector and what they're doing. So Hector and I know each other from a past discotheque, but Portland has been working on open data and resiliency and emergency preparedness. And so our hope is to really elevate this work that's being done, but across the state, because what we hear often from different regions of the state is that maybe they haven't been included or their voices aren't heard, but we know that the natural disasters are impacting our Oregonians across the entire state. So I'm going to let Hector tell us a little bit about what that looks like, what those needs are, some things that were brought up during the most recent discotheque, and why this is such a salient topic. And I'll let him talk about that for a bit before I close us out and we head to Q&A. Take the floor, Hector.
All right. Miss, thank you so much for the invitation. And it's been a very exciting for me to participate in this project. I definitely recognize the importance given like everything that we are going through right now. In my presentations, I highlight the issues that the city of Portland is facing in general. So that they are changing. 10 years ago, for instance, like just few advocates and experts were talking about climate change. And right now, the city of Portland and in general, the whole world of the state of Oregon, we live through a severe, at least two a year, severe climate events like every year, right? So how can we prepare uh, and how can those who are vulnerable be prepared as well, their networks, their communities, how local services can be ready for that, and then be efficient and effective. Yeah, how can we leverage data to do that in both sides? So those are questions that here in Portland we have been exploring, and not only internally in the city of Portland, but also with the help of the community. And before I continue, let me introduce myself. My name is Hector Dominguez. I go by he, him pronouns. I'm part of the Smart City PDX program at the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability in the city of Portland. I'm coordinating work on open data, privacy, surveillance technologies, and recently, relatively speaking, artificial intelligence, mostly public-facing activities and policy making too. Uh, well, let me go. I prepared like a short presentation just to guide a little bit this conversation. I appreciate the network of experts that I join in. It's pretty impressive. Usually, when I talk about all this, it's mostly data people, but not necessarily experts. So, anyways, my assumptions might be wrong, but that's how I see it right now. All right. So as open data is this movement or a strategy in general that, uh, you know, to make governments more transparent, basically, on the public-facing side. The movement of open data maybe started in the mid 2000s, more or less, with the same idea, data and information, digital resources back then and 2006, 2007, more or less, started to become something as an asset for government. The city of Portland had or has one of the earliest open data policies in the US. The first one was approved in 2009. Then we have a new open data policy in 2017, and that's the one that we are following right now. And that's the one actually that allowed the city to hire me originally. Uh, so with the first revision, actually, in 2009, the efforts were very well intentioned. You know, same idea, using data for to leverage government in general to create more trust, public trust, more transparency, and however, back then there weren't really many resources, digital resources around to support digital services, right? So again, 2009, 2010, more or less, a lot of good intentions. The business models to sustain that, economically speaking, and around talent, weren't really very solid. And sadly, by 2011, 12, the original open data efforts were kind of fading out. And then by the mid like 2015 they were gone, so there were just few people. Portland had a service called Civic Apps that was there, but with really old data in their repository, so nobody was using it. Then the smart city movement came in, and that's where the city of Portland saw an opportunity to start resurrect open data, right? So and open standards as well. So the city of Portland started doing all this new revision, the new policy that this time included data governance, for instance, creating better networks. Then back then, this idea of smart cities and cloud services, for instance, it started to become something. However, and there was an idea in Portland about creating the Portland Urban Data Lake, right? However, the challenge then, so in terms of policy, in terms of talent, we were okay, but the challenge has been that the IT infrastructure couldn't really understand how to use properly cloud services, right? So we have a few experiences where suddenly we started burning cloud credits with no use, no effectiveness, and it was an issue also then. And then things slowed down, and I think now we are living through a third wave, which is the artificial intelligence wave, where cloud services are a lot more mature. Data services are actually well implemented across the city for specific services. In our case, transportation, for instance, police, housing. Uh, we track some issues around climate and energy consumption, for instance. So we have the information, but it's very siloed. And just until very recently, data governance started to become something more solid that is still in early stages, but we are getting there. So baseline, so we are getting there. And it's taking time. However, on the public side, right, of this, the public trust, one of the duties of open data is to create the spaces for working together with community to allow community to interact with that information that is internal to the city. There are some other issues I'm not going to go through, like for instance, the role of privacy on open data, of course, is very it's intuitive that so we need to understand what is open, but also what is not open, what is confidential, what is sensitive, and all that. So we are already working on privacy, and we have privacy procedures internally just to make sure that the data that we publish is open. So once the data is open and available to the public, now the challenge is how can we make that information, that data, those digital assets actionable, right? And that's where public events, public engagement, public outreach is becoming more and more important. And this idea of hackathons, for instance, that 10 years ago were a thing, and then COVID slowed down everything, and now kind of we are restarting again a new wave of those. So creating spaces where people can just get together, work with data, share talent, share resources, and figure things out. And that's what we have been doing really for the past 2 years, where we celebrate Open Data Day every early March with some presentations, digital literacy spaces, and then we create, for the past 2 years, we have created these open data discotheques. The term discotheque is a term that we borrow from activists in Detroit, activists in Oakland, where it means discovering technology, or it's short for discovering technology, and it's just a way to create that space again for people to come together and work together in a fashion of a hackathon, but more in a collaborative-ish like spirit, right? For instance, last year, or this year actually, was same thing, early March, we're going to early March, and there is a lot of organizing behind that. Data catalogs we're not there. I mean, in putting together a actionable catalog is just taking long time and effort, just because we are still need to work internally on silos, internally on licensing, internally on procedures, policies, and it's a big lift for our program only. And that's something that the data governance effort is trying to resolve. So there is a space in Portland that is doing that. So we don't have the capacity to do that, but we need to find alternatives. And the alternative has been, we are creating those repositories through, I'm going to like escape here from the presentation mode, excuse me, and then I'm going to show the resources. For instance, we have a Google Doc where we describe the event, and within this Google Doc that share is available publicly, we start describing what we are going to do in this discotheque, open data discotheque, which is like a hackathon. What are the spaces, the agenda, and all that? And in this case, we have a code of conduct. And then we start laying down all the available and open data in all these different spaces. Like, could be in the form of dashboards, for instance. It could be in the form, sometimes PDFs, sadly, sometimes a spreadsheet, right, that are cleaned up and available. And right now, we don't use really Excel spreadsheet for publicly, but there is a lot of smart sheets that some of our bureaus are actually releasing publicly. And then we create big categories just for the event, right? Where like general resources from different, not necessarily from the city, but they are out there. And then resources that we have available for the city. And some of them, for instance, are not available anymore. So that's why people have the ability to make comments on these documents. And yeah, so in our case, we put like the basics of data of their Portland mobility, which are the tables that we were proposing to work on, public safety, resiliency, economic development, and then additional resources. So people have this first bundle, and then people who join to the event, they start kind of looking into that. After that, people start working on all these different issues, and then one of the things that they do is that they take notes and they develop a project. And on this, for instance, we also put together shareable and editable Google Docs where people and teams can just put the outcomes and results. And it's shareable, and that can actually be built for the future, right? So I'm going to go a little bit faster so we can have time for conversation. But yeah, here it is. All the different comments, people share resources, share links. It's like this common knowledge base for the community, right? So I'm sharing just the resiliency data document, and you can see people just share more resources to the ones that we originally shared. And these are the projects. One of the projects this year was a predictive heat index for Portland that included the canopy analysis. And there is another one that like the access to water. Yeah, here, access to water, depending on where you are in the city, where is the closest access for water for cooling. And also there is one around equitable cooling access, which means are the cooling centers, what is what you need to know. So these 3 projects were developed in our last discotheque. And finally, let me see. Menu here. Sorry, the 2 menus are in the middle. I'm going to move it. Okay. Yeah, we also have it in a GitHub repo, meaning that we have version control of all these. And this GitHub repo was actually inherited from 2000, the year before. We changed the name to 2024, and currently we have 6 repositories or spaces for work, privacy, resiliency, neighborhood, public safety, mobility, and the data basics, data literacy. We want these events to be welcoming to everyone. So if somebody has zero knowledge on data, so they can just jump in. The 2023, we use the Open Data Discotheque as the platform to put together the event. So there is a landing page. So this platform actually is pretty nice because it allows you to build a landing page for the event. This is the one, and I'm going to share all these links with you. Probably I can do it right now with the chat. And here it is. And then you can see, so there is details. The platform is developed and intended to be for hackathons and collaborative events. And in last year, 2023, we have 4 spaces, data basics, exploring data neighborhoods, mobility, and public safety. So each one of those, actually, if we go to, I'm going to click on one of them. And then the nice thing is that you can assign roles. For instance, we built also communication channels, like in this case, Slack. Recently we are moving more to into Discord, but another website for nodes, who can RSVP, for instance. And we have the roles that we were looking for. For instance, data storyteller, data scientist, data analyst, visualization, and you can build the different roles as its own project, which is probably what Meies did for her project when she participated in using this democracy lab. I'm going to go back to the presentation just to wrap up a little bit. But yeah, so basically last year we did I'm going to share it again, the three different spaces. Second. Go back to my window so I don't lose things here. Yeah, we actually have 4 tables: transportation, resiliency, the privacy table, and one on data basics. And this year we actually added something for kids, so that was really nice. The Democracy Lab is there. And just last thing, so again, where is the motivation from all this? I'm going to share this video on the origins of the Data Discotheque, just for you to understand that these spaces are intended to be welcoming to everyone. It's community perspective, it's not government perspective. That has to be very clear, right? So these spaces are not intended to be for city staff or government staff in general, but it's more for people in the community who are interested in exploring any issue around data. It doesn't have to be also using computer or digital things. It can be using art, for instance. For this year, somebody just was building an idea for Portland bridges with these fruit strips, right, for kids. So depending on the length of the bridge and how old, so they were building all this visual and interactive space for a kid to learn about that and have this sense of what that means in the physical space. So let me share this and hopefully.
Discotheques are short for Discovering Technology.
I am showing people how to make quick and easy flyers using an online design site.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear it?
I want people to learn to be empowered to use social media for the betterment of humanity.
We're going to be sharing information on how to make surveys.
The event usually happens once or twice a year. We've got all these people here who really understand how to break down technology.
Technologists and community organizers get together to make mini workshops to teach people how to use data,
how to get information that they need about what's happening in the city.
My station is focusing on mobile apps.
Demonstrating how you can find land for community trusts.
This is my first discotheque, so I'm very interested in how I might access and use open data.
What happens if community organizers have access to the same things that data analysts and technologists have access to?
When data is accessible to everybody, you can do a lot. You can change your environment, your world.
What kind of narratives will we draw ourselves?
All the different creative things you can do with data, creating murals, building art projects and stencils, doing like these beautiful visual infographics.
Data Discotheque not only creates an opportunity to demystify technology and data, but it also creates an opportunity to build relationships.
I didn't know you could connect data to other community issues like gardening and transit and other kind of techie related issues. Data is not always tech.
In the past, we've had discotheques that have centered around housing or centered around water.
The purpose of the Data Discotheque was to look at the new data ordinance that the City of Detroit just put out, which opened up government data.
And we're collecting surveys to inform a set of recommendations to the city on how to kind of put some data justice provisions in place around the current open data ordinance. Public data impacts different groups of people differently. There has to be more nuanced thought about how these data sets are going to impact different communities.
There's a lot of potential for people to really garner something that would work for them in their communities, and we have all the networks and the people who know how to make that happen.
All right. So this happened almost years ago, well, 9 years ago, right? In Detroit, and anyway, that's the idea of the open data discotheques in general. One of the issues, one of the challenges with bringing these public spaces, public engagement and data, we haven't been able to reach out to some of those communities that are really, really impacted yet. So when we make the call, usually the first in respond and joining to these events that, by the way, are hybrid. So we have a physical space at the Portland building, and which is Portland downtown. So people have to move there. And then we also open it for Zoom meetings. So we are trying to, there is some logistics around that and how somebody who's interested in working on transportation can actually join a physical table remotely, right? So we are figuring that out. So it's the second year that we did it better than the first year. And we hope that the third year we're going to be doing even that better, right? However, within all that, we haven't really been able to reach out to specific communities who are of interest for us to really, for them to participate in this event, to learn more about how to use data. That's a challenge, right? So mostly, again, communities that are impacted by the issues that we are trying to figure out, like public safety, transportation, housing, neighborhood, public participation in general. So obviously there is a lot there, and we're trying to figure that out. And the other issue is that sometimes data can actually be, making data equitable and open is challenging, right? So that can actually open a lot of accountability issues, a lot of transparency, and on the community side can actually open a lot of trauma. Doing this in a trauma-informed approach is something that we are actually learning right now. Sometimes it's not simply saying or going, for instance, in the resiliency, I'm almost on top of my head, right? Area where a community has been experiencing drought or fire or displacement or a combination of issues, right? And then we as external stakeholders arrive and try to collaborate with our community and bringing all these data and information can just revive or like repeat some of these trauma for some of the individuals. So we really need to work with the community on figuring out how to do that. So that's something that we in Portland trying to also understand how to do it. But this, I encourage everyone who is interested in that to be mindful as well. The last thing that I want to highlight here is the digital resources. Everything has a cost. That's something that Meies and we had a conversation yesterday actually about that. So where we store the data has a cost. How data is going to be maintained, access to cloud services, for instance, and it's not just a database. So it has a number of layers around that includes management, cybersecurity, maintenance, and keeping the data updated and valuable to everybody. Procedures underneath to build data pipelines around that. So everything has a cost. And right now, one of the projects that we have as Open Data is trying to figure out how to build digital commons in a way that are financially sustainable. So this coming year, I mean, we are starting doing that with a collaboration with some capstone projects at Portland State and hope to also to include Oregon State in some of these projects as well. So, but that's a challenge, right? How can we maintain data valuable to everybody in a sustainable way from the financial perspective, right? So, and maybe in the discussion we can actually have more conversation about those issues as well. So with that, this is the presentation I had ready very quickly, really, but I'm happy to start the conversation. And let me just stop sharing my screen then.
You can leave that up, actually. Go ahead and leave
Oh.
that up, Hector, because when I'm done, that's where we'll kind of end. So go ahead and leave your last page up.
Yeah. And by the way, before, yeah, that's all, right?
Yes.
Okay. So let me just do one last thing here. To remember. So this is, you can see here, broadly speaking. This is a flyer that we are putting together an art exhibit talking about open data and how to engage with community. So this art exhibit is going to be at the Portland building, opening this August 1st. So it's actually done by staff, coordinated by our program. And we are going to be portraying some community data, starting with the data visualizations that W.E.B. Du Bois developed for the Paris exposition in 1900, describing how the lives of Black families at that time, just a few decades after the abolition of slavery. So we are also portraying some local community data projects, including the old Chinatown, like all businesses that were destroyed and displaced because of the construction of downtown Portland, and a mapping of Black businesses and Black spaces in North and Northeast Portland as well, that all that area that has been gentrified. So trying to highlight how data can actually be this way to maintain history and maintain like the legacy of what community is doing, and also a way to balance sometimes the authoritative data that government may have and be complemented by this community perspective as well. So that's kind of the message. With this, we are also opening an open data challenge for high schoolers, for youth, to submit data projects to us, and they are going to, I mean, the best projects are going to be selected and awarded. And the idea is that for high schoolers to tell us the stories that are important for them, we are going to be creating some spaces for data literacy dedicated to high schoolers through summer and early September. So let's see what response we have on that. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to like sharing all this. I'm looking forward for like the conversations on this project, which again is very important and exciting to me.
Amazing, Hector. Thank you so much. Amazing, amazing. And that last project is a great segue into why does this matter for the work that we do at the state of Oregon. All these things are great and we love it. And Hector is correct. It is a cooperative hackathon. Typically in a hackathon, for those who might not be familiar, you're going there and you're really working on coding. And I'm not saying coding won't happen, but this is a map hackathon. So what we're actually asking is for community to map data that they think is relevant during either during a natural disaster or before a natural disaster, during or post a natural disaster. And the reason for that, I think Dr. Brandis Marshall says it very well. Coding requires 360 degrees of panoramic view. And that requires more than coders alone, because in order to see, understand, capture, and partially address the social, technical, and ethical considerations that we do in our work, we have to understand the context. We have to understand the sociocultural and the place context. And so the purpose of the project is really, this is a pilot project, and we are hoping that different agencies will come to the table. And currently we have the City of Portland as a stakeholder, we have the governor's office as a stakeholder, and we have the Office of Emergency Management as a stakeholder, as well as SORA. But the purpose is really for us to have community engagement and support by learning if and where there are gaps between the Oregon disaster planning efforts and the community's ability to implement those planning efforts, specifically around sheltering in place, access to medical and supply chain challenges that occur during a natural disaster. We're also wanting to identify other evacuation centers besides those that have been identified by the Office of Emergency Management. And lastly, supporting the community by engaging Oregon communities affected by at least one of the 12 disaster impacted areas from 2010 to 2023, and allowing those communities an opportunity to provide us with qualitative data on their region and how they navigated said disasters. The purpose for state agencies and or program staff is really skill and response support. There is an identified need for workers to receive kind of additional training in how we research communities for which we may not have a lot of information, but we're asked to provide resources or who have great needs. And so how might this look? How might we do research, analyze that data, use different technology, and in particular, how can we improve our ability to navigate dashboards and data maps? And also, natural disasters often cause secondary hazards, such as non-potable water, housing displacement, and the potential for increased violence. The more aware agencies are of these vulnerable areas that we may not be aware of, the better able we will be in creating contingency plans. And we have some very clear and set learning objectives for this event. We want to be able to learn about community-driven data collection procedures that we might not be aware of. We want to be able to get a better handle on how we can use open source geospatial tools for data collection and mapping. And the reason for that is often communities can't afford to use the same tools that we have. And so we're hoping that we have a better understanding of what's being used by communities or community organizations so that we are talking apples to apples when we're analyzing data or we're making plans around disasters and or understanding what a community's resiliency is. We want to have a better understanding of how we access and use open map data for disaster preparedness and response. And we want to have improved, enhanced map literacy skills and increasing one's ability to navigate and interpret interactive maps. So that's depending on what you might do, just understanding how this might look on a map will better serve the work that we do here at the state. But we were very clear when we set this up that we wanted it to be founded on work that's going to benefit not just state agencies, but communities. So the benefit is for communities and state agencies. And this may not happen all at once at the event. We realize that there may be other micro events or there may be other things that follow. And the hope is that in the future we'll have such events to better prepare ourselves for what may come. And so we're hoping for this to help us create updated and detailed hazard maps by disaster type and or geographic region. We're hoping that state government employees and stakeholders will feel more confident in using the mapping tools that the communities are using. And we're hoping that we will create or we will help support in the creation of a tech bridge between state agency and potential future state of Oregon employees. I mean, we want community to come work for us, and that's our goal. So the hope is that providing kind of a granular open geospatial data and maps event for the creation of multi-hazard contingency plans, that we can demonstrate kind of how crucial it is voice in creating an effective emergency management, disaster planning, and harm mitigation efforts. And I say this before we go to our Q&A section, because I was reading this really cool book and quantum radio, and I'm physics. I love physics as well. I guess I'm just a math geek, but it was talking about entanglements and in physics at the macro scale. And I'm using this analogy because this is often how we approach the work, because that's how it's structured. I mean, it's through no fault of our own. But on the macro scale, we create a disaster management plan, and everything looks like it works great. We can see it. We run an algorithm. However, because our algorithm and our codes and our trends, our actuarial trending, doesn't include and hasn't captured an understanding of the social, technical, and ethical considerations, it breaks down at the subatomic scale, right? And so he talks about at scales larger than atoms, the universe seems fairly logical and well ordered. Cause and effect govern the behavior of the universe, and we can move forward. But when you have an entanglement, you have things that don't work the way that they should. It changes things, and things happen that you might not even think what really should happen. And this happens on a small level. And what it means is that in an algorithm, mathematically, we kind of say, oh, this will happen, but we don't necessarily capture that this could also happen in a similar situation, but in a different geographic region. So sometimes we think that because someone's in a geographic region and we might approach a natural disaster from the geographic region, we have things that work the same in vulnerable populations across time and space. So whether they are in the Portland metro, or they are in Bend, or they are in Ashland, we will see similar outcomes, negative outcomes. And we're hoping that we can find ways to see positive outcomes. But we'll see similar negative outcomes in relation to a natural disaster. And theoretically, it shouldn't work that way, because the region should determine those outcomes, and our mitigation efforts really are about the region, the landscape, the fauna, how a flood might work, or if there's a wildfire and how it might burn through based on the trees. And that's a very effective way when we're looking at something at a higher level. But when we go down and we look at it underneath, we begin to see that communities operate in a way that is counterintuitive to how we might have done the math. And so our math and our coding and our algorithms have to begin to include this context. And this context will allow us to see, we know that in this type of disaster, regardless of time and place, this is what we see happening in communities. So we need to add this piece to mitigate that in our disaster planning. And that's really a overarching way of distilling what Hector is talking about, what they're doing. So what Hector talked about are all those little pieces. Those are all what we would call in the project ways that we're gathering data. And one of the ways that we are going to, a part of what we're going to get out of this map hackathon is, how do we begin to govern or track how that data looks as we are getting it into the system? What does that mean? How are we governing it? How are we tracking it across the data lifespan, so that we know what has come in, where it has come in the data life cycle, how we can apply it somewhere else so that we can understand it and we are able to better do the work that we're doing in support of community. So I am going to now thank everyone, and I'm going to have open it up to Q&A for folks who might have questions, comments, concerns, things I want to ask. Okay, I'm going to look in the chat because it looks like there are things in the chat that I missed. Let's see. So Hector, they would oh, you dropped the link. Someone hopped on late and they might have missed it. Tribal nations and data is or isn't shared. So I actually will respond to that one as someone who is Afro-Indigenous. This is a little bit tricky. Excuse me, and it's an excellent question. And that's because tribal nations own their data, and how that data is or isn't shared can look many different ways depending on the tribes. And so a part of this process, and I'm trying to look and see if it actually updated in my document, I created or I adapted a data lifecycle through an inclusion lens so that we can think about as people are providing us with data, so that we begin to treat that data that's provided to us as actual data, the way we would maybe data we've extracted from our administrative systems. And by doing so, it means that we have to think about how we share it, how we gather it, how we store it, how we dispose of it, who has access, who doesn't. And the hope is that as we begin to do this process, we will approach how we utilize data, in particular from, and I would consider tribal nations as vulnerable populations, how we treat that data that's gathered. Typically when we get it at the state and it goes into our system, it becomes our data and then we don't share it again. So we're being very intentional in this project that it's all open data and it's open and it's out there so that the communities always have access to the data that they have provided to the state. Stakeholders and team participants are going to be required when they participate to, if they want to use that data, to write a report that will be uploaded on the SORA website so that communities can see how that data was utilized, what the benefit was, and how it will benefit them. And it's not late in the game. We have reached, there is someone that I work with who is part of Wahoney, and she has also reached out to her tribe. So my outreach has been definitely at the communal one-on-one level, but I do believe that we should have a separate conversation, in particular about tribal nations, as well as the Black and African American community in Oregon. And I don't think that this is necessarily the place to have that robust conversation with community at the table, because the document that I created is just a placeholder. It's an outline. And as we move through the process, it's iterative. And so communities are going to have an opportunity to weigh in and say, I don't know if I like it quite this way. Have you thought about this? So I really appreciate that question. And we are going to be working, and that is front and center. And I just want to say again, I appreciate that you brought it up and that you recognize that it requires a deeper conversation. And you can let me know if that fully answered what you asked. If not, I can go back to it and answer more. Oh, we cannot unmute ourselves. I am not in charge. So I think maybe Michael would have to help you unmute. But I'll
They got it sorted.
Oh, okay. I'm going to go through the chat, and then I'll let Michael unmute people in order of hands raised. Let's see. Is there a plan to use AI to assist with the mitigation and emergency planning to fill in the community gaps that you've referred to? Oh my gosh, you guys are asking excellent questions. My hope is that in the long run, that we can create better algorithms that are, so are we going to use already created AI? For this particular project, the answer is no. However, do we encourage teams to modify or create algorithms or that will help drive mitigating and emergency planning to kind of fill in those gaps? Then the answer is very much yes. And that is our algorithms that we currently use as, and I'm going to go back to that quote, they are not a 360 degrees of panoramic view. They do not include those for whom we're trying to help. They're very much limited by how we see the world. And I'm going to use an example because we just don't necessarily think about it. So I play every day very diligently because I also love word games, something called Squirtle. It's Squaredle. And And in Squirtle, what you're trying to do is you're trying to find the words. It's kind of like Scrabble because they have to be playable in Scrabble. And what I'm learning is English is not my first language. French is. I'm Louisiana Creole through my mom, and I am Gullah Geechee Creole through my dad. And Creole is you are Native American, Black, and either French or Spanish. So I'm French Creole through my mom and Spanish Creole through my dad. And so when I play it, sometimes there are words that are words that might not be in English because they haven't been included in Scrabble, even though English has a lot of French words that it borrows from. So if it's a French word, I'm likely to be able to find it. Not so much if it's a Spanish word. And I was playing and trying to spell something and I kept getting it wrong and I was so upset. And what I'm discovering is I am limited, even though I just want to say I figure it out every day, but there's always a point where I understand I am approaching it on my understanding alone. And my understanding alone is just, it's not enough to know all the words. No matter how good I get, no matter what my SAT scores were, no matter how much I read, I'm just not going to know all the words. I'm not going to know them all. And I'm not going to know what they all mean. And so to that, I think that's where I'm going with AI. Currently, AI is constrained by who makes the algorithm and what they know and what their worldview is and what their culture is, what their language is. And when we think about AI, we think that math is very linear, and it's not. As I use that physics example to tell you, it doesn't always operate the way that we think it will. And AI learns in a way that we may not anticipate if we've approached it without taking into account and understanding social, technical, and ethical considerations beyond our knowledge. So that's my answer to, yes, I would like to create algorithms, ultimately, not me, but yes, I would like it if the project would ultimately create algorithms to use in AI, but in conjunction with community so that it is a little bit more robust and accurate. Let's see, our project's continuing. Oh, that's for Hector. I'm going to let Hector answer that one next. If you would prefer, okay. Okay, thank you. Tribal member here. Okay, working in the agency's Office of Tribal Affairs. Would love to chat with you. Yes. Okay, that's great. Thank you. We would love to have you chat with us. Thank you so much. Let's see. Projects can be continued after event. Yes, they can.
Yeah.
Thank you, Hector,
Yeah,
for answering that.
I can jump in quickly to explain that
Okay.
for those who don't have access to the chat. Perhaps is that the question was if all the projects in the discotheque continue after, and the intention has been that yes, they should, or they could. We are actually partnering with a local organization called City PDX on organizing these events. Where PDX, they have the ability to put together teams and keep going with these projects. The reality is that projects kind of stop there. It's like one day effort, and it has been hard. So we are rethinking about all these different approaches for next year and potentially encouraging people to engage on Democracy Lab to try to keep those ideas and projects ongoing. So it's again, it's a matter of how can we sustain those projects from the talent, the time, capacity, and resources available for those projects to be successful. So we are trying to figure that out, and hopefully this project and the coming projects. We have another one on procurement data that it may happen later in November, so we'll see. I can help.
I'm going to follow up with what Hector's talking about. So part of the role that I play is to kind of how do we organize the process so that we can do those things. And so we will have mentors in place. And so if someone is signing up to be a mentor, there's now links in the document because this question came up a couple of times we want mentors to know what they should consider before becoming a mentor. So we will be asking mentors to share their knowledge and expertise, but also to foster professional relationships. And that means that we're asking them to commit to a year, because everything is in the repository. And not just because we want the mentoring, but because communities will be continuing to interface and access the data and maybe even upload data. And we want to make sure that we're adding that to the work that we do here at the state. So those mentors and those mentors that come from the stakeholder, whoever that stakeholder is, they have to have at least one mentor, but they're allowed to allocate more than one. They will be the connector. They will be the ones who will be checking into, they'll be providing that guidance and support. They'll be offering technical expertise, giving constructive feedback, encouraging collaboration and teamwork. And all of this will be happening even post-event. So the thinking is that the event is just a pilot. And the hope is that this will be annual, because there's always change around disaster and disaster planning and community resiliency, so that we can refine it. And ultimately, we will have a very effective artificial intelligence tool, because we will have spent a few years really grappling with and working with it. And the hope is that by year 2 or 3, we're actually coding in the hackathon. So I hope that kind of close that loop. And I see that there are some hands, and I'm going to let Michael allow people to talk in order of hands raised.
I think people should be able to unmute themselves now. But yeah, as I said in the chat, be cognizant of the fact that there are many people in the meeting, try not to talk over each other, et cetera, et cetera. But I believe you should be able to unmute. If you can't, let me know, and I can just manually do it.
So go ahead and talk. I see a hand. I can't see the full name here on my phone. ED. Feel free to go ahead and ask your question.
Dragowski has a hand up. Alrighty. You may have moved on.
Are there any other questions? And while you're thinking about if there are any other questions, if you would like to participate, I would encourage you to drop that in the chat and how you're hoping to participate. We have the Office of Emergency Management, one person from that group said they really wanted to be a part of data governance and understanding how communities choose what is the authoritative data that they use and how they determine what data they aren't going to use and why, for an example. So it's okay to say, this is really what I would love to do or hope for in the work that I do. Go ahead and put that in the chat so that we can begin to create a list. But I would also encourage you, when you get that email from Michael with those Excel spreadsheets, to go to the SORA website, and there's a video on kind of how to interface and how to navigate an Excel spreadsheet. One of the Excel spreadsheets does have able bits. State workers can't use able bits, so just ignore that. That's because it's from a project of mine, but it's really because community members might be using able bits. So that also gives you an opportunity to see what might be used in a community setting versus a state setting and how you can bridge the two. But don't hesitate if you have wants to put it into the chat so that we can add you to that. And Hector, it looks like we may have ended with questions about the event. So I would like to open up open as the closing part of today is we would love if folks would share either in the chat or verbally just some challenges that you've had so far of public engagement in the data, of the needs you might have in the work that you do of either engaging the public in the data or gathering data from the public that isn't necessarily publicly available in a set data repository or a data place, and some ways that you are hoping to get some support around that, or ways that you think this might look, so that we can keep those considerations in mind as we prepare and plan for this. So the question on the table is, what are some challenges that you have engaging with publicly available data or public data?
On the challenges, recently I've been thinking about one, which is the survivorship bias. Is basically that data has to, I'm going to put the Wikipedia link here. So for those who don't know about that bias, well, basically is that where this analysis that was done on like all these planes that came back from battlefields, and you could see where the bullets were actually placed, I don't know, or hit the plane, basically. And you know, people were trying to design better planes back then. So the idea is that if you design better planes with just that information, those are the survivor ones, but you don't have the information about those who fall, right? So that could be invisible data for you. And you know, in general, particularly when talking about communities, and some of my other work involves surveillance technologies, for instance, and how we collect sensitive information. And sometimes, data can be invisible. We don't have information about what's happening with mostly with people who are experiencing homelessness, for instance, with Native American communities, with day laborers, people who are usually vulnerable, that they don't share data for many different reasons, or data is not accessible also for many different reasons, right? People who don't trust the government, and decisions are made that impact them. So that's one of the biggest challenges too. And it's usually through networks of trust that we can actually, from the government perspective, we can actually get access to that data. And there are different models, and definitely like this collective view of data governance is very important on how that could be, like how we can have access from the government perspective to that information in more responsible ways. And you know, when we're talking about the city level, the state level, that context, difference of context can actually be another factor within understanding what's invisible and what's not accessible for this analysis in general. I mean, may create different like intrinsic biases on our analysis as well.
Thank you. I love that, and I'm going to combine an answer with Oscar. Gosh, I don't know. I keep doing that. I'm so sorry. With Hector, my brain is so tired today. I apologize. And the question that's in the chat around a data novice, and I would say that this event is for all levels of data. So when I'm talking, yes, I'm not a data novice, but there's no assumption here that everyone or anyone is going to know all the answers. So your 400,000 data sets, to me, is pretty robust. from a community perspective when I'm thinking about my community. And to answer that as well as Hector, how do we do that? So in the work that I do, I use a lot of organizations that have publicly available data, and I use it for context. How do I think about this? What might they have that I may not know? And there's two that I'm very partial to. There's one, Native Land Digital, and it's actually a website. It's nativeland.ca, and it's Canadian, but it is OpenStreetMaps, and they have territories, languages, treaties, but that gives me some historical context. And while it isn't necessarily ours, it's a really good example of how I can look at what is important to the community, what data might be important to my community that I'm a part of. Their mission is to map Indigenous lands in a way that changes, challenges, and improves the way people see history and the present day. The hope is to strengthen the spiritual bonds that people have with the land, its people, and its meaning. And so it's a website that I use quite frequently in some of my external engagement with community and supporting community. So that's one. Another one that I am also very partial to, that I use for context and to understand and to fill in what I may not be understanding, is called kinfolkology. And again, that is a brainchild, and I believe it rests in, I think the repository is in Johns Hopkins. I'm pulling up the site so that I can see. But I use that one because they also have data. So one is Indigenous and one is African American. And they're each using data to map history, basically, but to show things that we might be missing by place, by region. I went to you can go there and you can look at kinfolkology and Black Beyond data. And basically what they're doing is they're starting to allow communities to put their data in a repository. There are different ways that you can access and use some of the data. There are permissions that will need to be had in the future, how the data is going to be used on some things. Currently, much of the data is still open. Some of the data you do need permissions to access, or you need to be a part of a particular group. And so that's kind of in an answer to say that your the work that you do is not small, and the hope is that you will come to the hackathon and we could put you with a team that is maybe doing some of those things. Our hope is that the teams will have folks from across the board of knowledge of data sets that they work with, and there's no single expert at the table. Everyone who comes is an expert in the thing that they do, and that we're going to germinate. We're going to help each other see the things that maybe we don't know, and that's how we're going to help communities. We're going to see and understand the things that we don't know. That's really kind of the purpose. So I think that's an excellent question, and that's the answer. We're going to be together and learning, and I think the best venue is to participate and come for the day and see what there is that you don't know. But there'll obviously be tools also for you. One of those tools will be very specific to what Hector discussed, and you're getting that in an email, so that COVID, the color of COVID data set is actually, it captures the deaths, not just the survivors, which is an unusual way. And we typically do that in public health. Public health is, I got my graduate degree at the Oregon Health Sciences University in community health disparities. And I study this, or my jam outside of work is looking at the social epidemiology of violence. And when you look at that, you have to look at not just who is harmed, but who is harmed that we don't necessarily capture in our data. So how do we capture them before they're actually dead? What's happening before someone dies, or before there's domestic violence, or before there's child abuse, or before there's some kind of an assault, or violence by displacement. There's all types of violence, and what are some of those patterns or some of those breadcrumbs that we see before that event, so that we're not only measuring the outcome. And that spreadsheet is an excellent example of how they measured the outsized impact on communities by looking at both who survived and who died, and then disaggregating it by place, race, gender, and type of job that they did.
Yes. I
Yes.
think M. Dragowski had the hand up.
Okay,
I don't know.
go ahead.
M, are you able to unmute yourself?
Thank you, Hector.
We can hear you.
Is my microphone okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, I had to sign out and sign back in and sign out and sign back in. So thanks for the opportunity to ask a brief question. As I've been listening to the talk, I realize I may be a little off base. The announcement, had me thinking natural disaster data. It had me, therefore, putting on my catastrophe hat and, being really concerned about in many situations involving, the change of the landscape around us, our infrastructure is taken away from us. And maybe it's just a very personal experience, or a small community is isolated, like when a landslide happens in the Coast Range, or maybe, we're all sensitized now, I think, to the bigger, like regional potential for losing our connectivity to one another, but then also losing our connectivity to our data and our plans and our, so forth. And I guess I acknowledge that that's possibly beyond the scope of what we're talking about today. But if I could get maybe some feedback, even offline, on, who is thinking in the direction of, disseminating the kind of fragile digital data in ways that are robust enough that, emergency coordination can still take advantage of all the wonderful work that goes into, assessing communities and vulnerabilities and strengths that help, to cope with disruption. So that's what I was thinking, which may not necessarily be a question.
That was so beautifully said, and thank you for coming back in. I even wrote in the chat, back in and out, in and out. In the document that will be attached to the email, we just didn't want to go through the outline today. That is very much at the heart of it. And the reason for this is I stumbled upon kind of the approach based on what's being done in Africa. It's very, very cool. And the tool that they're using to kind of map this when maybe they have areas that don't have a digital connection. How do we do this when we don't have these things, or when the natural disaster breaks these apart? But I think you got to the heart of it. What happens when we lose the tools or the things that we are used to having? How do we stay connected to one another? And I'm so grateful that you came back, because that is the heart of the project. Our hope is that, yes, we have a digital repository and we have this, but that we understand what community does when these things break down. Where do they go? What are those areas? So that we know and we can help support that. In this, and there's a link to it in the document, but in this mapping tool, I saw that they had a water station that they had kind of created in the community. It was on, they had water station, they had such and such as a house, they had a specific place of worship, they had, in another one, They had public bathrooms, which is where they met. And so you are bringing up, I think, what is the most salient, and that is how do we plan for the worst when we cannot communicate with each other? How do we help support each other? Because we're all a part of community. And what might that look like if we don't have our data tools? And we want to have that included in our disaster planning. So I think that you are right on base. And I appreciate you talking about that. And I hope that you will come to subsequent events or reach out and be someone at the table to help us make sure that we are staying on task in that area. And everyone's thinking about, have we thought about an alternative way to do this if we don't have such and such? So that's my answer. Hector, do you want to add to that?
Well, and for that comment, I think it's very important to keep communication channels open. We know what we know, and we don't know what we don't know, right? I think all this experience of doing this work for me personally is been making me very humble about what I don't know, and you know, sometimes it's challenging working in the government and you know, people trying to develop careers and all that. There's making data open finds many gatekeeping practices or barriers in general that could be not necessarily from the people, but from the infrastructure. And sometimes we don't know that, you know, all these other perspectives and what's happening on these other sides. And that's the importance of creating communication channels. And Em, I really appreciate your comments on that, highlighting that things change, highlighting that data can be very fragile, and also we need to maintain it. We need to keep it valuable for people, and that just takes time, energy, and commitment to do that. So I really appreciate that, and I think this is an ongoing process, and as a bureaucrat, it shouldn't depend on individuals to do it, but rather we should create effective workflows to make that happen, effective policies also that could happen, and then that could help in quick reactions, quick actions when issues are happening, right? Like early this year, we had the freeze, and you know, policies may put people at risk, and you know, we just need to keep in mind that all that data is about people, and we need to be very people-centered on decision making and remind ourselves about that. Just that. Thank you.
Thank you both for your very thoughtful comments.
You're so welcome. Well, it looks like we're almost at the end of our time, and I don't think I see any hands. Anyone can correct me, and I don't see any more questions in the chat. I just want to say thank you to everyone who attended today, and Michael will be sending out documents. Hector will be sending Michael or putting in the chat the flyer to the event. And you're always, of course, welcome to reach out. But we thank all of you very much for coming to today's event. We hope that you've learned today how amazing it is, the work that we do here for the state of Oregon, and how much we really support our communities. And we hope that you've also heard a little bit about how much the community needs us and the expectations they have of us, and the purpose of the upcoming event. And we look forward to seeing you more. Hector, did you want to say goodbye as well?
Sorry, my window gets closed. Yeah, well, I'm very excited about this. I think all these projects can be very impactful. All these projects connects us with each other, and that's what I enjoy the most. When after, I mean, it's a hard lift sometimes to put together these events. It just takes a long time. If, it doesn't have to be perfect, but it's a journey. And I think this journey, in terms of this particular issue around emergency preparedness, and it's going to be the new normal. We need to figure out how to react to climate events and how to support each other, how to build community in physical spaces, and how to build community in digital spaces. So for me personally, this is the way in which I can contribute to that. And I just want to appreciate Meies that opportunity to join this effort. I'm looking forward to working on all this.
Thank you so much, Hector. It's really not me. I mean, I make the document, but it's not me. It's really just all the things I've garnered from all the amazing people I've had the pleasure of working with. So thank you all for coming to today's event. I appreciate all of you, and I'm really quite excited about the magic we'll create together. And I hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful week. Bye-bye.